Playwright Anton Chekhov famously said, "Never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off." In other words, every detail must be relevant, and every setup should have a payoff. Thus, the narrative principle of Chekhov's gun was born. But it isn't always a gun. Chekhov's Whatever is a podcast where myself and guests watch a movie and try to predict what role Chekhov's gun will play. Welcome to Chekhov's Whatever. Hello and welcome to Chekhov's Whatever, the podcast that makes a game of movies and storytelling. I'm your host, Meg Mazeski. Here with me today to discuss the 2023 true crime thriller Woman of the Hour is Jen Deats. Welcome,
Hello.
Jen, to the podcast. So I know all about you, but why don't you tell the listener a little bit about yourself?
I'm this person who doesn't remember how to podcast. I literally had to ask Meg how to set the microphone in my Audacity because I couldn't remember. You guys, it's been a long time, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, even though we podcasted together as co-hosts for the Indoors Women podcast for 6 years, those are skills. You gotta use them or lose them, man.
Use them or lose them, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am one half of Indoors Women along with Meg. So if you want to check out our back catalog, you absolutely should, because even though the podcast has ended, it still lives on the internet. Please enjoy us. I'm Nerdify Jen on Instagram, and in real life, I'm an archaeologist, and I live in Colorado.
Yes, please make the $5 we spend a month on hosting Indoors Women worth it.
For the love of God.
Please go listen to the back
Go
catalog.
listen.
Yeah, so today on Chekhov's Whatever, we're here to talk about Woman of the Hour. This was a true crime thriller. It premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, but I doubt very many of you saw it there. Probably like us, you saw it on Netflix when it came out in October 2024. Woman of the Hour is about an aspiring actress who crosses paths with a prolific serial killer in 70s LA when they're cast on an episode of The Dating Game. This is based on the true story of serial killer Rodney Alcala. Woman of the Hour stars Anna Kendrick, Daniel Zovato, and Tony Hale. This movie was also directed by Anna Kendrick in her directorial debut. It's currently at about 91% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 68% audience score. So, Jen, what were your expectations for this movie going into it?
Well, I knew a little bit about the story because I had a very long time ago, like probably several years at this point, listened to a My Favorite Murder episode that was about the dating game serial killer. But literally all I remembered was he went on the dating game.
Yes, he was dubbed the dating game killer. It did seem to be his, I was going to say, claim to fame, you know, besides all those women he murdered.
All the murder.
Aside from that, yeah, indeed. I did not know too much about this movie going into it, except for the basic premise that it was based on a true real-life serial killer. I wanted to go into the movie pretty much blind, more and more these days. I don't know if it's getting older or what. I used to consume trailers like crazy, but now I like to know like the bare minimum about a movie, and then I'm just like, don't tell me any more about it. I just want to watch it. So that was about the extent of what I knew about this movie going into it.
It's kind of funny because I remember us in high school, you get like really annoyed with me if I was going to be at the movie a little bit later, or if I was like going to pick you up a little bit later than we had originally intended and you might miss a trailer.
You have to see the trailers.
Of the movie. You have to see the trailers. And that was pre-YouTube, so we couldn't just like go watch the trailers at home. So if you wanted to see a trailer, you had to be in the theater to do it. But yeah, nowadays, same. I'm kind of like, I don't really want to know. Sometimes I'll peruse trailers if I just need an idea of something to see or of something that's streaming. But usually these days, I'm much happier going in pretty blind. And other than knowing a little bit about the serial killer, aka almost nothing, other than he was a serial killer, I went in not knowing anything.
The only other thing I knew was that Anna Kendrick was in it. I didn't even know that she directed it until I was preparing for the podcast. But I like Anna Kendrick. I have a lot of goodwill toward her as an actress, so I'm always happy to see whatever project she's in.
For sure. She's one of my ride or dies. Like, I pretty much see everything that she does. I mean, not everything. I mean, some of those comedies are looking really bad that I'm seeing pop up in places, like older comedies that are on streaming now. But I get excited about an Anna Kendrick role if it looks like it's a good movie.
Totally. So before we get into scene by scene of Woman of the Hour, here's a quick overview of how Chekhov's Whatever works. This is a podcast where myself and the lovely guest watch and review a movie that's new to us. We also play a game where we try to guess what Chekhov's gun will be and how it will play out later in the movie. Chekhov's gun is a plot element that must have a setup and a payoff. That setup usually happens in Act 1, and the payoff typically comes later in Act 3. A Chekhov's gun is also typically a concrete item or action rather than something symbolic or thematic. And finally, a Chekhov's gun should move the plot forward in a meaningful way. We get +2 points for correctly identifying a Chekhov's gun. Remember that there may be more than one or none. We also get an additional point for correctly guessing how that Chekhov's gun will pay off. And finally, we lose 1 point if we incorrectly identify a Chekhov's gun and its role. Whoever has the most points at the end of the movie wins. All right, let's get into it. Woman of the Hour. We start overlooking the remote landscape of Wyoming in 1977, according to the information card. It is sunset. We see a man with long hair. This is Rodney, the serial killer.
Spoiler, he's the serial killer.
Spoiler killer.
You kind of know that. And also he serial kills someone right away. Well, I guess he doesn't serial kill right away, but he murders right away.
Yes, he is taking photos of a blonde woman. She's talking about herself. And she's really opening up to this man, and she breaks down when she tells him about her ex-boyfriend and how he broke up with her when she told him that she was expecting his child. Rodney goes to console her, but he goes from very caring to changing on a dime. His demeanor completely changes, his eyes go cold, and he strangles this woman only to resuscitate her and then strangle her again. Which I learned later after watching this movie that this was true to the real killer's modus operandi. He would strangle his victims repeatedly. So,
Yay.
Not a great guy.
Not a good guy. And
No.
Also, as a caveat that I was telling Meg about before we started recording, which is I may have put in my guesses for more Chekhov's guns just to sort of hedge my bets. We'll see how it reflects in my score. But right away, because I do love cameras and I love film photography, he had these like 2 big heavy cameras around his neck, and that like the first scene you see is actually it's shot through the viewfinder of the camera versus shot just straight on through the video camera. So he's like looking down through the camera view. And my thought was that I really wanted him, the serial killer, to get hit in the head hard with one of these heavy cameras later in the movie. So I immediately was like, first scene, Chekhov's Whatever, wanted him to get hit in the head by a camera by one of his victims who was defending herself. So that was my first prediction.
Do you have a name for this Chekhov's gun?
We can just call it the heavy camera blow.
Okay. We go to the next scene. It is Hollywood, 1978, and we meet our main character, Cheryl, played by Anna Kendrick. She is bombing an audition. She is in front of a couple of casting directors who are talking right over her. And then when they do speak to her, they ask questions about how old she is. They ask about whether she's willing to get naked.
When did you graduate from college?
Yes, they ask these very fishing questions.
Yes, and also they are talking to each other about her, and you don't even see her right away, and then you realize they're having this whole conversation about her, and she's right there. The camera turns to her, and it's like, oh, they're saying these insulting things right in front of her.
Yeah, right away we get a lot of the theme of the movie, which is
men suck.
Yeah, the misogynistic culture of the 70s that could obviously be projected out to today, but I think this movie was really trying to focus on what sort of societal landscape led to or emboldened such serial killers as Rodney. Right away, we're thrown into, it sucks to be a woman sometimes / often.
Yes, especially in the 70s. And sometimes it gets better and sometimes it really doesn't.
Yeah. Cheryl drives home in her car, screaming in frustration to herself. She knows she has not gotten the job. And then she also tries to avoid her annoying neighbor, Terry, who is a fellow aspiring actor. She gets a phone call from her agent, and real talk, she's not cutting it as an actress, but good news, the agent has told her that she has booked her on a TV show, The Dating Game. Cheryl and Terry are watching The Dating Game to get her, I don't know, inspired, ready for her moment on the show coming up the next day. They go to a bar to sort of commiserate. She clearly has mixed feelings about going on the dating show. She really doesn't want to go on it for any dating reasons, but she does see it as an opportunity to perhaps advance her career.
I want to stop right here and say, when she's driving in her car, I see her keys, and on the keychain is this smiley face, but the like smile is starting to wear off. So because I think I was overzealous at finding all the Chekhov's guns, I was like, this smiley face keychain is one. And I was like, it will identify the keys later as being hers. And somehow she'll be separated from her keys and unable to get in her car when she's trying to escape from the serial killer. And that was what went through my head. When we talk about Chekhov's gun being like every detail feeds the plot, I actually like when details don't necessarily feed the plot, like they speak to character or they speak to like other aspects of the story other than plot. It might be different that in a play, but in a movie, I like when sometimes things are done just because. But I was like, this smiley face, this is something. We're going to see that smiley face later. So I had zoomed in on that, even though the camera did not recognize it in any way, did not zoom in, did not give any sort of clue as to what might be coming. I was like, yes, this smiley face keychain is the one.
Like you said, it gives you an insight into the character. It shows instead of telling. And I do like, I didn't notice it, but I do like that the smiley face is rubbing off. I think that's also
like part of the smile is gone.
It's a very good illustration of like the smiley face is so worn down that it just can't even do it anymore. It can't even pretend to be smiling. So thematically, that works really well.
Yeah, I thought it was a good detail.
So back in the bar, Terry decides that now is his time to make a move. He clearly wants to be more than friends.
He is an idiot.
Yeah, no, he's not very suave. He tries to tuck some of her hair behind her ear, and she sort of flinches and recoils. It's like, ha ha ha, what are you doing? You know, she's like, I'm just not that into you. But then he guilts her a lot, and she makes to leave, and he's like, oh, I guess you're not going to stay. And then she concedes to getting another drink. Cut to the next morning where she's in bed with him. Clearly regrets.
That surprised me. I mean, I guess she was, it illustrates that she was feeling pretty down about herself and she was, stuck in this rut. And he was a person who was around who was like caring about her struggle or seemed to care about her struggle. But I was kind of surprised that she went from, okay, I guess we can have another drink to sleeping with him. Yeah, it kind of bummed me out, but I think it's kind of supposed to bum you out.
Yeah, I was surprised too, but after seeing the entire movie, I think it makes a little bit more sense to have this happen because by the end of the movie, we see the change in her, that she's willing to stand up for herself when she feels like there's no connection between her and a man. Whereas in the beginning of the movie, she capitulates to the man's desires, whereas in the end, she's like, this guy is a total creep, beyond a total creep. I'm not going to make myself small or for him or anything like that. So I think it's important to show the evolution of the character.
Absolutely. And sort of that facade of lightness, that facade of like obligation that a lot of women feel, obligated to be polite and do the nice thing and be thought of as nice and accommodating, and sort of moving through the steps of like, okay, this accommodation is actually putting me in danger and leading to decisions I don't want to make. So I like those changes for her.
The next scene, we cut ahead in the timeline a bit. We go to San Gabriel, 1979. So a lot of the movie's format time-wise will be cutting between our main timeline in 78 in Hollywood following Cheryl's story, and then also cutting back and forth to some of Rodney's previous victims or attempted victims, etc. So in 1979, we meet a young woman named Amy. I don't think they ever actually say her name, but that's her name according to the internet. She's a very young woman, a teenager, I would say, whose penniless and homeless. She's a runaway. She wakes up from sleeping on a bench. She takes a bunch of free chocolates from a store.
Okay, so the candy hearts, she takes the chocolate. It's like, just take one. It's Valentine's Day. And she obviously takes like a huge handful. Like, you see her, it looks like she's only taking a couple, but then it cuts to her in the laundromat and she has a pile of wrappers
yeah, like
next
a pile.
to her and some uneaten chocolates. So I was immediately like, okay, this candy heart is going to be something. And I thought later, like, he was going to kill her and then he was going to like pull a chocolate out of his pocket. Like, he was going to have that candy heart later. It's going to illustrate that she like still had him with her, and it's like this whole like broken heart kind of thing, I guess. I also did not notice right away that we were in 78 as the central timeline, and this is in 1979. So I actually didn't notice that this was in the future of the point where Anna Kendrick is interacting with this guy. And so if I had paid it more attention to that, I would have maybe thought through things differently sequentially. But I thought it was like, oh, this is one of his one and done serial killer victims versus like something that's happening later.
I also did not clock that this timeline was in the future from Anna Kendrick. It wasn't until I was double checking my notes. But yes, I also thought that this was predating Anna Kendrick, that all of these were flashbacks and not a flash forward. I think they only show the years once, so it's pretty easy to lose track of what's happening when, especially since there are so many flashes and cuts. It's a little hard to keep the timeline in your head.
And I usually don't particularly pay attention to the date when it says like the place and time. Like, my brain will like scoot right over that and not necessarily pay attention. So I was just like, this is the past. All these cuts are to the past versus cutting into the past and into the future, which I thought was a little bit confusing, but I guess not confusing if you like were clocking the dates, which I obviously did not do.
I think overall it doesn't influence the understanding of the movie as a whole too much, but it would have been nice to know.
Yeah, by the end I had figured it out, but yeah, I definitely didn't notice it until the end of the movie.
Yeah. So Rodney sees Amy smoking in a stairwell and he starts snapping a few photographs of her. He approaches her, compliments her, flatters her. He says, I'm an amateur photographer. I would really like for you to model for me in this photography contest that I'm going to be entering. This is my Chekhov's gun. I'm calling it Chekhov's Shutterbug. So I didn't know anything about the real life serial killer aside from his dating game appearance. So my guess was that he would have all these photos of his victims, not only of his victims, but also maybe of him enacting his crimes. So essentially, he has all these photographs that are evidence of what he's done. And I thought that Cheryl would come across these photographs of Rodney's and that she would put two and two together, that these were his past victims, and then she would point the police in his direction and say, oh, I have this photographic evidence. So that was my Chekhov's gun.
That's a really good guess. And I'm like, oh, photography, da 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 da. I'm so into photography. I want him to get hit in the head with a camera, but I didn't think of photography equals photos and that photos might show up later. So that was really good. Very specific.
The thing I couldn't decide about this detail was, I thought, well, either this is a fictionalized narrative plot detail or it really was his MO. But at that point, I didn't want to look up what his actual crimes and modus operandi were. And I was like, well, maybe this is like the Ted Bundy thing where Bundy would pretend to have an injury wearing a fake cast or a fake sling.
Oh, help me load my van.
Yeah. And then he would ask people to assist him. And that's how he got his victims. And I'm like, well, maybe this is just true life to the killer, that he would lure his victims by taking their photograph. And spoilers, yes, this is true to real life. This is what Rodney Alcala did. And he did have thousands and thousands of photographs of people, but only one person was ever positively identified as one of his victims. But there's like hundreds of these photographs out there that the police have put out to say, like, if you know anyone in these photos, let us know.
Yeah, I remember kind of the details of him and his prolific serial killer status. Like, potentially he was very prolific. So yeah, having all those photos, yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, definitely. In the next scene, Cheryl arrives on the set of the dating game. The makeup ladies give her the lowdown, and they're laughing and joking over how all the bachelors are either maniacs or morons. Enter the host, Ed Burke, played by Tony Hale. He sort of swans in and, of course, instantly reveals himself to be a misogynistic, racist narcissist. And he also objectifies Cheryl because, of course, he does. He tells her basically just to smile and act dumb and look pretty on stage.
You seem smart, but don't be smart.
Yes.
And like also she hadn't said hardly, he didn't let her say anything, and I'm like, how did you know that she was smart? Like she literally, you didn't let her say a word. You seem smart. What was giving that impression? Okay.
Right? I didn't know what he thought sounded smart about her either. Maybe he's just like hedging his bets, like I'll just tell them to smile and nod no matter who they are. He also tells Wardrobe to put her in something more flattering after making some comments about her body. And then we cut to, I described them in my notes as a couple of boomers, but I realize now in the 70s they wouldn't have actually been boomers, but they're acting like boomers. Okay, so there's a couple of boomer-coded people.
It's so drab.
They arrive on the set of the dating game. They are not impressed with the studio a lot. They thought it would be a lot fancier, a lot glitzier. They are there with their son and his girlfriend, Laura.
One thing that's sort of general, one that I had, like Chekhov's jewelry, I guess we could call it. Which is like, I really noticed that Anna Kendrick was wearing these like heart earrings and that she had rings on, and like every girl who was a victim had rings on because it was the 70s and like people wore a lot of rings and jewelry. And they kept like zooming in on his hands and people's hands. And I think it was a stylistic choice by Anna Kendrick, but I was also like, I'm seeing these like distinctive rings. I'm wondering if something like that is going to turn up as a trophy later. So that was a sort of general one that's not really linked to a specific scene. So I thought I would insert it here. And also it might just be because I really like earrings. And so I'm noticing people's earrings. And I notice when Anna Kendrick comes back in the more flattering outfit, she has different earrings on. So I was like, I don't know, jewelry as trophies.
It's interesting that you say that because he did keep jewelry as trophies in real life. And actually, beyond the DNA evidence, one of the few physical pieces of evidence they had against him was that he had earrings from one of his victims that they found in a storage locker of his.
Nice. I feel like even if it doesn't show up, I should get like a thumbs up. Not a bonus point, but a thumbs up for knowing in real life he might have done this thing.
It also makes me wonder now if that was why Anna Kendrick so intentionally focused on jewelry, because it was part of the real life case. Perhaps that's why.
Yeah, and he had like these very specific rings that were like gold rings, but they had like a flattened base. And then, yeah, I just noticed rings on everyone's hands, and that she did zoom in on people's hands, at least his hands, like when he was taking pictures and stuff.
It's funny because what I noticed when they zoomed in on his hands was how bitten his fingernails were. And then I just felt ashamed of my own bitten fingernails. I was like, does that make me a serial killer?
Yes, it's directly linked. Like there's a correlation and causation between biting fingernails and serial killing. So I'm sorry, you now have to go be a serial killer.
I should have known.
I've outed myself. Made up statistics.
So Cheryl goes on stage, the stage lights blind her, and this flashes to a flashback of New York City, 1971. This is yet another vignette with one of Rodney's previous victims. This woman is remodeling her new apartment. She asks Rodney for help bringing her furniture up to her apartment. He also strangles her to death.
Spoiler, strangles.
Spoiler.
Yeah, this guy is really strangling. And also, this is one I'm really proud of, so I'm going to make sure to insert it here, which is backstage when they're walking out. She's walking out with the producer, or it's a woman, so like producer's assistant or something like that, because it's the 70s. And the woman tells her, watch your step, and there's a lot of cords on the ground. And I said, okay, Chekhov's electrical cord. Someone is going to trip on an electrical cord and cause a disruption to the broadcast, and I'm really hoping it's not Anna Kendrick's character, because the heroine tripping and falling is very cliche.
That's true. Well, we shall see.
We shall see if that works out.
Back on the set of the dating game, Cheryl makes her appearance on stage where she meets Bachelor number 1, who is stammering and just kind of awkward.
Later, they're like, he's a medical student. I was like, really? You couldn't put 2 words together.
Right. Bachelor number 2 is a sleazy ladies' man, and Bachelor number 3 is even worse. He's our serial killer, Rodney.
That guy. Oh my God. I couldn't see it coming.
We get a view of the audience in which we once again see Laura, who was the girlfriend character arriving on set. She clearly recognizes Rodney, and she's not happy about it. She flashes back to a beach bonfire party where Rodney is snapping photos of everyone there. You can tell that she's very disturbed by recognizing Rodney. Meanwhile, we're getting into the dating game. Cheryl is forced to ask these really inane, very sexually coded questions. Yes. But the audience is lapping up Rodney's answers. Cheryl is disgusted by all of them. And audience member Laura just gets more and more distressed the more the show goes on. So Laura hurriedly excuses herself and tries to flee the set, only to trip over an electrical cord. Woohoo! Congratulations, you're the winner of the dating game.
Chekhov's electrical cord.
Yes. But yes, she trips on a cord, she pulls down a monitor, and she interrupts the show. Cheryl can barely make her out past the stage lights, and they cut to a commercial. Laura goes out to the parking lot. She tries to calm herself by having a cigarette. As she thinks once again of Rodney, we get another flashback. We see her hanging out with her friend, who we can only presume was a victim of his.
Yeah, I thought her story was the saddest thing about the movie, where she's, in this position, and I just can't imagine not having options. And also, it could still happen today. Like, you try to go and, make these claims and make these complaints and go to the authorities, and no one listens to you. Her story made me really upset. It made me sadder than the other stories. I mean, it's sad that other people died, but I just feel like she was really struggling and really trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, it seems like there are so many real life cases of if only someone had listened sooner, so many more victims could have been saved, potentially. And I think this movie does a good job of illustrating that. We have yet another flashback, this time to 1977, to the Los Angeles Times. It's an office Christmas party at the newspaper. Rodney is there schmoozing with his coworkers. It doesn't specify in the movie what his role was at the Los Angeles Times, but apparently he was a typesetter briefly. But he's there showing off his Polaroids and photo albums.
Oh, many photos, did you say? That he was showing off?
There's a coworker of his, a younger man named Mario, who is clearly off-put by Rodney. And Rodney kind of sort of comes on to him and invites him to come to Malibu with him later that night. Mario is unnerved and just sort of puts him off. And then the police arrive. They're there to speak with Rodney. He tries to play it off to his coworkers, like it's no big deal. At the end of the interview, the detectives don't seem to see him as a threat. They're laughing together. They're joking. And Rodney seems to think that he's gotten off scot-free, but he notices his coworkers whispering about him behind his back. This makes him upset. He goes into the restroom and he's crying to himself.
Poor Rodney.
I feel so bad
Poor
for the
guy.
serial killer.
Oh, I killed so many people and now people are talking shit about me.
His coworkers don't like him.
Oh.
He better go to HR.
Because I'm a serial killer. Oh, what a bad day.
Why don't people like me? Yes, but it's even more awkward for poor Mario, who was at the urinals trapped and trying not to be noticed.
He is I'm like, where is this guy going to be? Is he going to be in a stall? No, it's even worse. He is at the urinals around the corner.
Yes.
Trying not to pee so he can't be hurt. I assume.
Yeah, he just tied it off.
He's like,
Clench. Rodney tries to play it off and reiterates his invitation to go to Malibu.
Definitely ask people to go to Malibu with you at the urinals.
Yes, right after being, interviewed by police and sobbing to yourself. It's a good look, for sure.
It's not suspicious at all.
No, but Mario more firmly says, "Nah, I don't think so, man. I think I'm busy." Rodney breathes in deeply. We hear his breath, and this is contrasted with the sound of waves crashing on a beach. We cut once again to the bonfire beach party that Laura was remembering. We see the body of a woman in a hotel room, it looks like, and we learn that this was Laura's friend, Allison. Laura is in her car. We are back again outside the set of the dating game. That's the timeline we're in. Her boyfriend comes to check in on her, and she says, "I recognize Bachelor number 3. I think that he was the guy who killed Allison." She's also clearly still feeling very guilty about this. She says that she warned Allison against him because she was getting weird vibes from Rodney, but she feels like she could have done more to save her friend. Her boyfriend is a jerk and clearly does not believe her story and tries to talk her down and says, "Well, that couldn't be the same guy. That guy you saw at the beach must be in jail, right? Like, surely he's in jail." And she gets mad because he's not wanting to listen to her, and she orders him out of her car.
Yeah, not only is she up against everything, but she's also up against her stupid boyfriend who's like, "Oh, that can't be right." And it's like she is having such a visceral reaction to seeing this man that she's like running out of the recording, that she's like locked herself in the car, like, and she's very, very upset. Like, obviously she recognized him. It's not like all guys with long brown hair like give her this reaction.
I think it also speaks to how at least this character, or maybe many people at the time, had a lot of faith in the police. He says, "Well, you talked to the police, so surely that gave them enough information to arrest the guy who killed Allison, right?"
Because he's a white dude and is like, of course the police listened to every word you said and followed up on it. She's not only a woman, but she's a person of color, so it's like a double block against her. They're definitely not listening to her, and we're not listening to her.
Exactly. So we're back on the set of the dating game. They are on a commercial break. Rodney boasts to Bachelor number 2 that he, quote, always gets the girl, which I have to assume means he always murders the girl.
Murders her, yeah. Oh, and if he doesn't get her, he gets her. You know, like if he doesn't like win the favor of the girl, he kills her. So either way, he gets the girl.
Big scare quotes around gets. Meanwhile, the makeup lady convinces Cheryl to just ignore the host's direction, to just have fun. And this gives Cheryl an idea.
What are they going to do? Fire you? You're not a recurring character. Just do whatever you want.
So they go live, and this time Cheryl doesn't pull any punches. She has written down her own questions, and they are very cleverly worded. This is where I think we really get the quintessential Anna Kendrick character. She's very like sassy and cheeky.
And smart. Yeah.
Yes.
And fast talking.
Yes, definitely fast talking. The host, Ed, is not happy about being overshadowed, and he tries to get the show back on the rails, but Cheryl pretty much ignores him. For all the questions, Bachelors 1 and 2 are very dumbfounded, but Rodney continues to woo the crowd. And Cheryl maybe has a couple of flashes of being like, okay, that wasn't the worst answer in the world, but she's definitely not feeling sparks with him.
Like, just because he can kind of know how to answer a question doesn't mean that it's like his true feelings, right? Like, he is just the smartest one of the 3 dummies. Therefore, he knows what a good answer is. It doesn't mean this is how he lives or this is how he presents himself in the rest of his life.
Yeah, and of course at that time she had no idea that he was a serial killer, so to her he was just the lesser of 3 evils, but that doesn't mean he was some dreamboat that she definitely wanted to marry right away or anything.
She wasn't gonna like spend the rest of her life with him. She wasn't taken in by him. She wasn't enraptured with his answers or with him. Mm-hmm. She was just like, okay.
Yeah, like, oh, okay. Basically that.
It wasn't really dumb like the other 2 people. Like, the first guy, like, my favorite one was when she was doing the stupid questions initially that the show provided her, and it was like, you're a nerd and you're asking me out on a date. He literally stammered through it, but he was like, hi, I'm a nerd. Want to go on a date? And I was like, what? You couldn't do anything better than that? And then the second guy was obviously super sleazy and sexist, so it was literally just like, this third guy is not awful.
Right. Little did she know. During the commercial break, the host is furious, and Cheryl asks the makeup lady if she went too far. The makeup lady says, no, you didn't go too far. You just have a more direct way of getting to the central question. And the central question is, which one of you will hurt me?
Which is a terrifying question.
This also calls back to the very first scene with the blonde woman in Wyoming who was one of Rodney's victims, where she was saying that she couldn't talk to her family about her boyfriend because she was afraid that they would say, oh, we told you so, and he was too risky. And she says, yeah, I took a risk, but everyone's risky. And I think that was also very much speaking to the theme of like, well, men, I guess, have a potential to be risks. And Anna Kendrick's character, a lot of her story is trying to evaluate just how dangerous the men in her life are. And anyway, I think that the makeup lady's line is definitely theme of the movie stated, callback to the beginning of the movie, etc.
For sure.
So we cut to Rodney, and Bachelor number 2 confronts him about ratting him out on stage in answer to one of Cheryl's questions. Rodney tries to intimidate him and hands him a Polaroid of one of his victims' bodies, perhaps.
Yeah, with like blood or something. Yeah, he's disturbed by it. We don't see it for very long, but Bachelor number 2 is disturbed by it.
Yes, Bachelor number 2 is very disturbed. He's rattled, and he calls him a weirdo. And Rodney does the totally not weird thing of eating the Polaroid.
Also, don't eat Polaroids. Like, that is like, don't eat photographic paper. That's can't be good for you.
No. Lots of chemicals. Yeah, it was the 70s.
So many, like,
there was
chemicals.
Lead in the gas. There was lead in the paint. It was a different time.
Yeah.
It's probably nutritious. So between these scenes of Cheryl on the set of the dating game, we also are interspersed with scenes of Laura, who is trying to get help. So she approaches the studio security officer about her concerns about Bachelor number 3, and he's like, okay, I'll escort you to the executive producer's office. Wait here. So she waits there and waits, and we will get back to her in a moment. But now it's time for the finale of the dating game. Cheryl chooses Bachelor number 3, aka Rodney. But when she meets Bachelor number 2, as he comes on stage, he whispers a warning to her about Rodney being a total weirdo.
The only good thing that Bachelor number 2 does the entire time, good on him for saying something to her. Because, like, he obviously doesn't respect women very much. But, like, he probably should have done more. Like, he probably should have just, like, stayed with her or, like, gotten security or escalated the situation more. But at least he does the bare minimum.
He does redeem himself a little bit. When Rodney meets Cheryl, he's very touchy-feely. He embraces her. He puts his hand on the small of her back and really grossly caresses her with his thumb. But yay, they've won a trip to Carmel. Woohoo.
Yay. And also, it wasn't very clear to me, like, a trip to Carmel? Was this, like, are they supposed to go away for the weekend? Are they supposed to, like, meet at a restaurant? Like, what exactly is supposed to happen? I don't know, but it seems weird to me that they were like, you've won a trip. And I'm like, she has to go on a trip with this guy?
Right. On the real dating game episode, they won tennis lessons and a trip to Magic Mountain.
That's funny.
We go back to Laura. It turns out the security guard was just putting her on. He did not have her wait for the executive producer. He gave her the name of the janitor.
For a second, I was like, well, he gave her the name George Eliot. And I was like, well, that's an author's name, so it's a fake name. But no, that guy's not smart enough to do that. He just gave her the janitor's name, which he thought was hilarious.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
But Laura was not entertained by this little prank, obviously, and she leaves incredibly discouraged. Cheryl is also leaving the studio, but she is more pleased with herself. It looks like maybe she did have some fun after all. She's giggling to herself a little bit. But then Rodney intercepts her in the parking lot. You can tell she's definitely not feeling the spark, but she does reluctantly accept his invitation to go somewhere else. To which I say, never go to a second location.
No.
Speaking of, we flash forward again to the runaway girl in 1979. She has also made the mistake of following him to a second location. She is in Rodney's car smoking, and they are swapping backstories. She also flips through an album of his photographs, and I was like, oh, she's going to find something weird and it's going to tip her off. But no, it was just his normal photos, I suppose.
He does take it away from her pretty quickly. He was like, let's forget about that. Maybe she had got to the special section, the serial killer section in the back yet.
Yeah,
and he was like,
the trophy section.
Let's put that in the back.
Yes.
When they're in the car and Amy's in the car with him, she pulls a candy heart out of her pocket and says,
oh, yes.
Here, this is for you because you're my Valentine, which is really gross knowing that he was going to like try and kill her later.
Yes.
But I was like, the candy hearts showed up again. Definitely not in the way I thought they would, but I was like, maybe like half a point or like not a negative one for that one. I don't know, but it didn't quite work out like I thought it would, but he did end up with one of the candy hearts in the end.
Yeah, we can discuss during scoring.
You can give me like a partial credit or like a pity non-negative maybe on that one, considering some of the rest of mine did not work out.
He takes her again to a remote area like he did with the victim in the first scene on the pretense of taking her photo, and he tackles her, and we cut once again back to Cheryl and Rodney. They have gone to a tiki bar. It seems like she might be warming up to Rodney a little bit. They bond over the fact that they are both from New York, and she's impressed that he is familiar with the play that she will be auditioning for called Cowboy Mouth. But then she laughs at his remark when he compares her to Patti Smith, and he takes this very personally. Once again, we see his demeanor completely change. There are red flags everywhere. He's very prickly, he's very defensive, and frankly, he's pretty scary. He asks the waitress for another round of drinks. Cheryl signals the waitress, no more drinks, please.
Women taking care of women. She's like, oh, last call.
Yeah, whatever the female version of the bro code is, the waitress has accepted it. We need to think of the female version of the bro code. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, I was like, good for that waitress who's like taking care of her. And I'm like, good thing it was late at night and she could be like, it was last call. Because like, what if it was like 7 p.m.? Oops,
right.
It was last call. Like, obviously it wasn't last call. She would have had to think on her feet a little bit more and come up with something to help. I hope that she would have.
But yeah, she probably would have come up with something because it's pretty clear that she cannot leave that bar fast enough. So they leave and Rodney asks her for her number. And since it's the 70s, she writes it down on a pad of paper. And while she's writing down her phone number, he goes to tuck her hair behind her ear. This is very much mirroring what Terry did in the bar. But this time, instead of flinching away, she just stays stock still. And I think it's because she can sense that there's something very off about Rodney. And this is her fight or flight, or I don't know, go possum instinct. She knows that it's in her best interest physically for her safety to just not react to this guy.
Well, he overreacted so much to her laughing at him. It's like that old quote that's like, the worst thing a woman can do to a man is to laugh at him. And then the response is, the worst thing a man can do to a woman is murder her.
Yeah.
So yeah, it made me think of that in the moment.
That's true.
Like when he was so offended that she was laughing.
Yeah, very apt for this movie. Rodney walks her to her car in the studio backlot, and he asks her to repeat the phone number that she's given him. They both know that the other person knows that she gave him a fake number. She stresses at this point that she doesn't want to see him again. She has no intention of going to Carmel. She gave him a fake number. And he mutters a very violent threat to her under his breath. And she says, what? And he just doesn't respond. And at this point, she knows she's very much in danger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a very scary scene. So she's hurrying to her car. We see Rodney slowly coming in the side of the frame and catching up to her. It's a very tense scene. There's this great buildup of tension from the tiki bar scene forward, culminating in this moment in the parking lot where she's trying to escape him. It's very much like a scary movie, trying to literally outrun the killer in an empty parking lot. Right when she gets to her car, he catches up to her and basically corners her against her car. But luckily for her, at that moment, a group of men leave the studio, so she knows that she could call for help from them if she needed to. They exchange a look. Rodney basically is like, well, you win this round, and he backs off. Cheryl is able to make her escape and drive away.
There's this look that's like she sees the guys come out of the door and she just gives them this look. She's like, it's so obvious in the silence. It's like, I can scream, but if you just let me go, I won't. And I'll just go home and we won't have to go to the police or like have a big altercation. But if you don't let go of me right now, I will scream and those guys will come over. So it's just like everything I read in that expression in that like short little moment in time.
Yeah, I think that Anna Kendrick is particularly good at playing a certain archetype of character, like we were talking about before, the snappy, quick-talking, sassy heroine.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that this scene was her best scene in the movie. She really communicates a lot without saying much. And just that simple what, when she kind of hears but doesn't entirely hear or want to believe what she heard Rodney just say about her or against her. There's like a lot of fear in her voice, and I just think she does a very good performance in this scene. It's a very scary scene. I think that most, if not all, women can relate to it to a certain degree. Surely every woman has felt a moment when they did not feel safe, maybe in a situation almost exactly like this. So it is a very effective scene.
Parking lots are scary, especially in the 70s. Like, you don't have any of the usual tricks and tips like we might be able to use today, like no cell phone obviously, and no, you know, buttons on your keys to make all the alarms go off, or like start the engine, or like just do anything, and no car alarms you can set off. It's just the options are so limited in comparison.
And there's also sort of the irony of the scene that it's only because there's other men there that she has a potential escape from this other dangerous
Otherwise she
man.
has nothing that she can do. Like if they hadn't come out during that time, then it's like, what would she do? Like, we like to believe that Laura would, you know, go to the police and that they put together that he was the one who killed her, but there's nothing really she can do to help herself.
Yeah, speaking of Laura, we see a scene where she makes up with her boyfriend. He brings her flowers and all is forgiven, I suppose. And also he drives her to the police station to follow up on her statements she made previously. But the police either won't listen to her or they just don't feel like it's a lead worth chasing. And essentially she gives up. She leaves the station very frustrated and feeling powerless because she's trying to help. She's trying to do good. And she goes to the one outlet that might be able to do something about the situation, and nothing comes of it.
She screams at him, and then as she's trying to leave, you can kind of see these other cops go, ma'am, like they're trying to subdue her. It's hard to tell what's going on, but it's almost like a cop maybe coming up to her to kind of try to get her to calm down or whatever. Like she is the one creating the problem.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it looks like Cheryl has given up on her dream to become an actress. She packs up her LA apartment and loads up a moving truck. We flash forward once again to 1979 to Amy. She wakes up in the remote hillside. It's clear that she's been assaulted, but she is alive. And Rodney is sobbing beside her. She thinks very quickly on her feet, and she sees the potential opportunity to save herself and decides the way to get out of this situation is to play it all down and manipulate Rodney. So she acts embarrassed, and she implies that she won't tell anyone by also saying like, hey, maybe we could just keep this a secret between us. This seems to be the right thing to say to him because he listens to her, he unties her, and then they go back to his car. She manages to play it cool until they stop at a gas station, and as soon as he goes inside to use the restroom, she runs away. She makes it to safety, and she calls the police on Rodney, who arrest him. She watches from a safe distance as Rodney is being arrested. She seems about to scream, but then it's cut off as the movie ends, and we go to the end cards, which explain the real-life ending to this story, which is that Amy was based off of a real-life person who was a teenage runaway who did escape from Rodney. Her testimony helped lead to his arrest, and also her testimony during trial, quote, put a nail in Rodney's coffin, according to the prosecutors. He was eventually sentenced to death for the murder of 7 women and girls, but some authorities estimate that his victim count may have been as high as 130. He was not put to death by the state, but he did die in incarceration. The Cheryl character was based off of real-life person Cheryl Bradshaw, who moved away from California and after that incident seemed to live a pretty normal private life and raise a family. So yeah, that's the end of Woman of the Hour.
Also, there were just so many aspects, like we talked about earlier, of luck. Like when Rodney is going to grab Cheryl, a bunch of guys come out of a doorway and it gives her the opportunity to escape. And also when Amy is escaping, he stops at a gas station and is going in to use the bathroom. And it's very lucky that there is a diner like within a mile of that gas station, because if you've driven a lot of these like back roads through like the Southwest, like we have, like there's like can be few and far between finding anything, like having facilities or like having like a place to eat. And in the 70s, even more so. So she did absolutely the right thing and she ran for it and was able to get away and also be in a place that was close enough that she could feel safe, but also she could report him and have him arrested. And it's just so many things had to kind of line up for that to happen. And it's good that that happened, but it's also just so unfortunate that like so many just like tiny twists of fate can really make such a huge difference. And it's terrifying to think about.
I'm sure that the real life Cheryl must have felt particularly lucky after learning about all this because gosh, what a situation to be in. Who else can say that they were so, I mean, obviously they weren't close, but close-ish to a serial killer in a situation where they could have very easily serial killed you and then to have escaped. Pretty crazy stuff.
And also, so many of these killers would, like, when they're on the road and traveling around, like, there's jurisdictions in the same general area, in the same state, like, don't talk to each other. So they wouldn't have connected these crimes. And it's just so scary to think about how before not that long ago, people still had jurisdictional issues where, like, you know, police departments don't talk to each other. And I'm sure it still exists. And also, like, querying the federal database obviously wasn't a thing and sometimes isn't even done now. So it's just sort of terrifying to think that this could have been going on with 130 victims and there would have been no evidence that was actually put together to put him away for so long.
Yeah, for those who are interested in learning more of the details about the case, there's the Wikipedia entry, of course, which I read. I believe he went to trial 3 separate times for reasons that you have basically already verbalized, that he committed a lot of crimes in a lot of different states. And because of crossing over state lines and things like that, there were times where he was arrested and then let go on bail or let go before trial. And I believe he was technically found guilty and sentenced to death 3 times in 3 different trials because of all the different jurisdictions. So yeah, it's very messy. And also the one photo that identified a victim of his, that photo wasn't identified until 2016.
Wow.
So the whole process it's complicated. It's a little amazing that he even ever got arrested and found guilty considering all the details.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's like a terrifying wilderness. Like if you decide to leave your home and travel around or sort of escape your life and run away, like it's a terrifying wilderness today. And I can't even imagine how much of a terrifying wilderness it was in the 70s. Just like no contact and no options.
The television landscape seemed horrifying in the 70s. Did you watch the clip of the real life appearance of Rodney on The Dating Game?
I didn't now, and I don't think I did when I listened to that podcast episode way back when either, but that sounds terrifying. Did you watch it?
Yeah, for those who are interested, you can just look it up on YouTube. It's only 10 minutes. Apparently, The Dating Game was incredibly short. I had no idea. I think they went through multiple bachelorettes and bachelors for the entire episode.
So they had like another person churning through them.
Yeah, so it's very quick fire, but it's just very odd to watch a person who you know is a serial killer and seeing them try to act like a normal human being, or as normal as someone can act on a 70s dating TV show, which is to say not very normal at all because it was incredibly cringy. And it was interesting also, though, just from the movie making standpoint to see what changes they made. Like on the real dating game, he was bachelor number 1. It's like, okay, I'm not really sure why they felt the need to make that change.
Totally different. Well, I guess, like, because it's leading up to him, I guess it's, like, a little bit more suspenseful to have him be bachelor number 3.
That's true, yeah. Have the last reveal of the shadowed figure and then bring the lights on him and then, oh my gosh, it's Rodney. Yeah, it was more dramatic. And there is, I would say, a passing similarity between the real Cheryl and Anna Kendrick. I don't think they concern themselves too much with looks as far as casting in this movie went, which I think is totally fine. I don't think you have to, when you're doing a real life adaptation, I don't think you have to make them look entirely like how the person looked in real life.
Yeah, and it wasn't a biopic of Rodney or anything like that. It was just sort of a vignette, like telling a story. So I can see it not being that important to match appearances of everyone.
Yeah, speaking of adapting a real story into a narrative piece of fiction, this is one thing I wanted to talk about. So moving into sort of like the overall impressions we had of this movie, one problem that I did have with it is that I do feel like this movie hewed too close to real life in the sense that it suffered narratively, I think, a little bit with the Cheryl character, because when you're telling a fictional story, you have Cheryl as the heroine, right? And it's like, well, when you have a heroine, you expect them to be, in the case of a thriller, you expect them to be instrumental in some way in catching the bad guy.
Yeah, like she was going to go to the cops right after this, and she was
Exactly.
going to see Laura there, and they were going to figure this out together.
They were going to put the clues together. They were going to have their own brand of vigilante justice. So when you set up a heroine type character and all the tropes of like a thriller and like catching the bad guy and then not delivering on her being an actual heroine, it was a little bit disappointing to me. And also, although I did mention I feel like we do see her evolution from the beginning of the movie compared to the end, where she is more interested in standing up for herself, not just smiling and nodding and making herself compliant. But that being said, apart from that, she's not a very active protagonist. She's very reactive. Stuff happens to her. But on the other hand, we can see her role as sort of like the lens for telling these other women's stories and illustrating the similarities. And like you said in the beginning of the movie, where it starts with a shot through a lens, there's also a moment on the set of the dating game where they're filming the monitor and then they pull back and we see that we weren't seeing the people live. We were seeing a recording of the monitor. So I think that sort of mirrors Anna Kendrick's character's role, is that she's the lens through which the entire story of all these victims is told. But on the third hand, I'm like, well, couldn't we have just made Amy the heroine? Like, we cut to her story so often. And if we really want to tell the victims' stories, then maybe Amy just should have been the heroine.
And it's like, because of the dating game aspect, like if you took that out, then maybe it's a less not less compelling story, but it has is less unique than others. And also it's an interesting caveat when you see like descriptions of this movie, because they say a serial killer goes on a dating show to find a potential victim. It's like he went on the dating show and he didn't kill her. So it's like they're kind of getting around the fact that she wasn't actually a victim in the same way that the other women were. But yeah, it's like this central interesting point, and what they can do is they can use it to illustrate the situation of how bad it was for women at the time. And also they can do a cool set piece that is recreating the dating game. That is what draws you in, and then they're able to tell the rest of the story. But yeah, it was interesting. Like, you could almost lift that whole piece out, because the action of it and the crimes were not part of that. It wasn't part of the dating game.
I think it is fair to say, like you said, that it would be less compelling without the dating game. And that is the hook of the movie, right? It's
the dating game killer.
Yeah, it's in all the promotional stuff. It was the moniker they gave him. So it's definitely the hook. But beyond that, it's like, well, yeah, how do you make a movie around this when it wasn't actually integral to the true life story? And I think the answer is, well, I guess you do this flashback thing. I don't know. We'll try to tie it all together somehow.
Flashback and flash forward, and I feel like Amy should have been given like a little bit more.
Yeah, it wasn't completely successful to me. It has the hook, but I think it maybe makes a better Wikipedia article than a plot for a movie.
Mm-hmm. The puzzle pieces don't really all fit together. Now, something I'm curious about, was there actually someone in the audience that was recognizing him live? Because one, that seems incredibly unlikely.
Uh-huh.
Like, they happen to have like witnessed this crime against her friend, or like witnessed the lead up to this crime against her friend, and also she happens to be in the dating game audience, and it happens to be the episode he was recording. I feel like without Laura, the link to the dating game and the crimes doesn't gel as well, but also I found that really, really unlikely. Like, I mean, it would make more sense if like she was at home watching on TV, because it has like this was like a national television show. So that makes more sense to me, but it was definitely more dramatic to have her sitting in the audience.
Definitely more dramatic. As far as I know, that character in that situation was a complete fabrication. The Laura character was just sort of like a surrogate for all of these people who had gone to the police about Rodney, but either were not listened to or not followed up on. But no, there didn't seem to be one particular individual that Laura was representing one-to-one. And also, as far as I can tell, there didn't seem to be any people giving tips based on the dating game. As far as I know, there was no one who watched the show from home and thought, oh, hey, that's that weird guy from before. So yeah, Laura seems to be entirely a creation of the movie.
It kind of makes the two parts of the movie hang together better. But also the whole time I was thinking, this seems really unlikely. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, like, I liked her part of the story a lot, and I thought she did a lot to like try and catch this guy, and like sort of tied it to the dating game more than Anna Kendrick's character did, obviously, because she was just sort of in this one situation this one day and then, moved on from it. But yeah, it didn't quite gel just because of that.
Speaking of the Laura character, I think that sort of segues into the game section, because I wanted to talk about Laura's character a bit as like kind of a Chekhov's gun. I don't think she was ultimately. She was this plot element that there was a setup, but then I was like, payoff ? I don't think the payoff ever really came to fruition. So flashing back to the first scene where Laura is introduced, where we see the slightly older couple and the boyfriend and Laura in the studio parking lot arriving for the taping of the show. And at first I was like, are these Cheryl's parents? Like, I honestly had no idea.
I was like,
how
who are these people complaining about stuff?
Yes, I'm like, how do these people fit into
them?
The picture? At that moment in that scene, I'm like, well, clearly these people are being introduced for a reason. I'm not sure why at the moment. And then, of course, we see the purpose of Laura later. But I would say the payoff would be that she would be instrumental in getting Rodney arrested in the same way that I anticipated that Cheryl would help to get Rodney arrested. Anyway, it was just an element of the story I wanted to talk about in relation to Chekhov's gun, because I feel like it hit a lot of the earmarks in certain ways, but there wasn't a payoff. And I felt like that was unsatisfying narratively.
I thought they could have done a little bit more at the beginning of the introduction of these people, rather than just like cutting to them in a parking lot and it's this random older couple complaining about, oh, the studio is so drab from the outside.
Yeah.
And I think that it might have been more effective if there was like a line, like when you go and watch a live taping. I've never done this, but I assume that they line you up, because I've seen shows and like you line up outside of something. Like if they had a bunch of people lined up who were obviously supposed to be the audience, or if they had first introduced them as like audience members and they were just like kind of sitting around waiting for the taping to begin, it would have established them a little bit more, because initially I was kind of confused as to who these people were and why they were there and why we cared.
I actually had in my notes Cheryl's parents, because that was just the assumption I made. And it wasn't until later in the movie that I'm like, wait, no, this is not.
This is a different person.
These are not. But yeah, let's talk about some more Chekhov's guns and what some of our guesses were. Let's get into the game.
Okay.
Our first Chekhov's gun was one of your guesses, Chekhov's heavy camera blow.
Yes. Which did not come to fruition, and I was very disappointed. I really wanted Amy to just take that camera, hit him in the head with it, knock him out and overpower him. And I was like, up until the end, I'm like, she could still do it. She could still grab a camera and hit him, but she did not.
I think a lot of your guesses definitely would have come to fruition if it were not based on a true story. If we had the traditional face off with the heroine versus the bad guy. But like I said, I feel like they follow the true story too closely to the detriment of the movie.
It makes sense if you're in this place and you're isolated, you use the weapons that you have, and the cameras would definitely be the heavy thing that you would have that would be easy to grab.
And it would be poetic justice. But yes, alas, -1 point.
-1.
That did not come back. Next, we have Chekhov's smiley face keychain.
Nope, again.
No.
I was
another
really waiting.
-1.
He was chasing her through the parking lot, and I was like, oh, he's gonna grab her keys. He's gonna grab her keys, or something's gonna happen with her keys. Then nope.
Yeah, she could have punched him and then we could have had like a shot of the smiley face like swinging back and forth while the key is like lodged in his cheek or something.
Or she like gets into the car finally and she's so relieved and she starts it and it just like zooms in on the smiley face or something. I don't know. Anything with the smiley face keychain showing up and playing a role.
Yes. Next up is Chekhov's candy heart. So like you said, this did come back.
It did.
Okay, discussion time.
It was not in the way I thought it would. And I know it kind of... It was more like it was speaking to character, like, oh, she has this candy heart, and she doesn't have anything. Like, she has literally nothing. And she's, like, starving. She, like, stole all these candy hearts from the laundromat or whatever, and she was eating them. And she feels so grateful for him in that moment that she says he's her Valentine and, like, gives him the candy. It definitely didn't pay off like I thought it would, and I don't know if we could argue that it paid off at all.
Yeah, so I'm trying to adopt this the guest is always right ethos, but I'm also trying to be more of a taskmaster than I was
in terms
before.
of like how we define these things and like
Yes.
how we score.
So I guess I would say also, I think that a Chekhov's gun usually moves the plot forward. And let's imagine that we subtracted the candy heart from the movie. The plot wouldn't change one way or the other based off of its presence or absence. But you also zeroed in on that it was a specific detail. It had a payoff. It did have a setup, but perhaps in a more thematic way. So I would also feel bad taking away points. So this isn't in the rubric. Let's do +1 point. How does that sound?
Okay, sure. I'll take it. I wrote pity point next to it. That's exactly what happened. I like your observation about if the Chekhov's gun was absent, the plot would change or wouldn't change, and that's how you kind of decide. And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind, because I think that I might have I think I would have the exact same Chekhov's guns. I'm not going to say, oh, I might, if I hadn't thought of it that way, I might have picked different things. But like, no, I probably would have had the exact same things that I have right here. But that's a good criteria for judging it.
I will say it's a criteria that has recently gelled for me. And even in previous episodes of this podcast, I hadn't been thinking about it that way. But I do think it's a good earmark of a Chekhov's gun.
You're still figuring out what exactly.
I'm still figuring it out.
Works.
Yeah. And then there's my Chekhov's gun, Chekhov's Shutterbug. This did not have a payoff. It was just illustrating the real life story of like, this was this guy's MO. This is what he did to lure in his victims. And it was not in any way instrumental to getting him arrested. So I'm subtracting 1 point.
Okay, so I did think without the photo albums, so your like whole thing was that there was going to be a photo album and there was also going to be like photos of his crimes. But I feel like without the photo album, certain plot points don't happen. Like when he's showing the photos later and then they're showing the photos at the end and it shows a photo of that guy from the bathroom is like in the photo album, I really feel like it adds to the plot. It makes a difference. So I'm kind of like more pro like at least 1 point there, because I feel like it is a Chekhov's gun, but it didn't pay off just in the exact way that you thought it would. Does that make sense?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I suppose the movie would progress differently without the photographs. Okay.
And he definitely had that photograph that he ate, that he showed the guy.
He did definitely have that photograph
and
that
if
he
he
ate.
hadn't shown that guy that photograph, then that guy wouldn't have whispered in Anna Kendrick's character's ear to like look out for him.
You know, that is true. Okay.
And that was a photo of his victim. Like, I'm kind of pro giving you like full points on that one. I feel like you covered the bases pretty well and like what actually happened.
You know, you've convinced me. Okay, so I'll give myself the 2 points for correctly guessing a Chekhov's gun. But I really thought the payoff was going to be a photograph is going to get him arrested. Like, this is going to be like the incontrovertible proof that like puts him behind bars. That was like really how I thought the payoff was going to be. So yeah, I'll give myself 2 points for that since it wasn't quite how I thought it would pay off.
I think that's good.
And then we have Chekhov's jewelry trophy.
Yes.
It didn't pay off in the movie, but it was true to real life.
It was like what really happened was he kept jewelry.
Yeah.
Well, and also like in real life, the photo of that one victim did lead to him being convicted on the account of murdering that one woman. So I feel like if we're also just like expanding it to like what happened in real life, since this was based on a true story, I don't know.
I know. I don't know what to do with this one. Like, I just think it's cool that like you intuited that it was like real life. But yeah, I guess it didn't come up in the movie.
So I think I get -1 for this one too.
Okay, I'll do -1 point.
I'm learning a lesson. If you have me on again, I might not guess in quite this volume.
And then lastly, we have Chekhov's electrical cord.
Yes.
Full points for that one.
Yay, I was so excited. I even wrote down, someone will trip, and hopefully it's not Anna Kendrick, because that's cliche. And then I was so happy when Laura tripped on the electrical cord and like threw off the broadcast and everything, and I was like, yes.
Okay, I'm going to calculate the points now. Boop, boop, boop. Robot noises. I have to do this every time. So the final scores are Jen with 1 point and myself with 2 points. Yay!
Congratulations! I'm like, this must be a soccer game, so it's so low scoring. Definitely not playing basketball. And also my 1 point was like directly the result of like the pity point for the candy heart, because otherwise I would have ended up with -1 score. And a +1 is just like a little bit more affirming than a -1.
Yeah, I won with 0 before. It doesn't feel as good as winning with positive points. So yeah.
It's interesting. It really works as a scoring system because like I could have put down 20 things just like hoping one would pay off, but then I'd really rack up the negatives. So I was like, okay, I want to put in several, but I don't want to go too many, because I was like, if I put down, every single object I see, then I'm definitely going to be in the high negatives.
The spaghetti at the wall approach.
Yeah, exactly. Spaghetti throwing approach to this game. I also think that this movie, it's interesting to me because like we both go into the movie like not knowing what happens in the movie, obviously, because you can't play the game without that. But I'm like, there's always something that ends up being important to the plot. But I went in thinking, what if this is the movie with like nothing that ends up paying off later? And I'm like, well, that's probably not a very good movie then, if it has like no object or idea or concept that then pays off later in the movie.
That's true. I'm going to level with you. This is my fear before every single episode. I'm like, what if this movie doesn't have a single Chekhov's gun? But, that's why this is at its heart a movie podcast. And then the Chekhov's gun thing is just a little game that we also play on top of talking about the movie.
I feel like if you're ever super worried, you should just text me, and I've probably seen the movie, and I'll just tell you, yes, play with that movie, or no, don't play with that movie. And like give no other information. And I'll be like, yes, a thing paid off at some point.
Something paid off without any sort of clues. Yes. Yes. Another interesting thing 4 episodes in is that no one has made the same guess so far, which I find pretty interesting. So we'll see how long that streak lasts.
Very interesting. Until like you get to a Marvel movie and everyone's like, well, obviously it's this thing. It's going to pay off later.
Exactly. An Edgar Wright movie, but we've all seen those already, of course. Exactly. So
we've seen all those. We need to come up with new ones.
Yes.
Come out with new ones so we can play. But yes, I would definitely come back and play again. This was really fun. And it's nice being on a podcast with you again.
Yes.
It's so weird that we haven't done this in so long.
I know. It's been great having you. You played an excellent game, and I would love to have you back on. Thank you so much for joining me, Jen.
Yay, thank you for inviting me. And I had a super fun time. And yeah, it's like a little Indoors Women reunion. And who doesn't love that?
Yes, listeners, I have no doubt that you will hear Jen again. And in the meantime, please go check out the Indoors Women podcast. We've got hundreds of episodes. So if you loved us, which I know you did, please go check that out. And thanks again for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Chekhov's Whatever. Go to chekhovswhatever.substack.com to follow along with the podcast. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a positive review. You can also find video clips and full audio episodes on YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe at Chekhov's Whatever. And finally, you can send email to chekhovswhateverpodcast@gmail.com. All right, let's end this show with a bang.